Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. The FDA has issued this warning to parents. Do not seek a COVID vaccine for your child until the agency has approved one. And a vaccine for children could be coming as soon as the end of October.
Meanwhile, governors across the country continue to push back on the president's vaccine mandate. Dale Hurd has the story.
The CDC says the percentage of children with cases of COVID-19 that are serious enough to need hospitalization is 0.008%. And with cases reportedly rising among kids, the FDA is warning parents not to have children under 12 vaccinated until the agency gives approval, saying children are not small adults. CDC data show COVID symptoms among children under 12 usually range from asymptomatic to mild. And yet the former head of the FDA indicated a vaccine for children could be coming.
You could potentially have a vaccine available to children aged 5 to 11 by Halloween if everything goes well.
This as opposition grows against Joe Biden's vaccine mandate last week that orders businesses with more than 100 employees to either require vaccinations or offer weekly testing. A spokesperson for the conservative Heritage Action for America told CBN News it's unconstitutional.
We really don't got to call this out for what it is. It's a fundamental attack on our rights.
The rule, to be crafted by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, carries penalties up to $14,000 per violation. At least 7 Republican governors say they'll fight it, with some already announcing legal action.
This is an egregious overreach of federal authority. And as we see what these rules are, we will be able to know exactly how we will be able to challenge them in court.
I'm trying to overcome resistance, but the president's actions in a mandate hardens the resistance.
It's also fundamentally unfair to have somebody lose their job over basically a personal medical decision.
But the Surgeon General defended the mandate.
If we want our economy to be back, if we want our schools to stay in session, we've got to take steps to make sure workplaces and learning environments are safe.
But one upstate New York hospital has had to stop delivering babies after maternity staff quit over a COVID vaccine mandate. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, clearly this vaccine mandate is tearing the country apart. But here's the very practical thing. In the rise of the Delta variant right here in the 757 area code, just try to get a COVID test to see if you've been exposed. And on all of the websites, if you have no symptoms, you go to the back of the line. So how in the world, on a practical matter, are you going to take 80 million Americans? If you say, well, okay, well, half of them are unvaccinated, that number is 40 million Americans, and subject them to a weekly COVID test. The system will be overwhelmed. There's no way that you can comply practically. So if there's not a huge mobilization for testing kits, testing laboratories, this order will absolutely have no effect. And I wonder if the administration has really thought this through. How in the world are you going to test that many Americans on a weekly basis? Well, in other news, Senate Democrats are fighting among themselves over their $3.5 trillion budget proposal. And now time is running out. Joe Manchin says he can't support it as is and they shouldn't rush it through. But Bernie Sanders says it's now or never. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. Senator Manchin wants to slash the president's budget plan by as much as $2 trillion, and he's calling for a strategic pause so Congress can consider the price tag.
Known, and the unknown is everything you've been talking about. COVID, what's going to happen with COVID, what it'll do to the economy. No one's talking about inflation or debt, and we should have that as part of the discussion.
Manchin says lawmakers should focus on passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill designed to upgrade roads, bridges, ports, energy, and broadband internet. Sanders says the budget bill, which includes new programs expanding health care, education, and child care, should get preference.
They happen to think that the needs of the human beings of our country, working families, the children, the elderly, the poor, are even more important.
Democrats are already talking about a new plan, including higher taxes. Republicans call President Biden's spending proposal reckless. Well, a threatening storm has Texas and Louisiana bracing for days of heavy rain. After making landfall this afternoon, Tropical Storm Nicholas is expected to slow down and bring as much as 10 inches of rain on coastal Texas and southwest Louisiana by midweek. That, of course, raising the risk of heavy flooding. Well, turning now to the Middle East, where Israel's prime minister is putting the world on notice that time is running out to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the warning follows an alarming UN agency report.
Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is sounding an international wake-up call.
I'm calling on world powers. Don't fall into the trap of Iranian deception that will lead to additional concessions. They are dragging on. We must set a clear-cut deadline that says, until here. The Iranian nuclear program is at the most advanced point ever.
Israel remains clear. Its military option to strike Iran's nuclear facilities is open. Earlier this month, the UN agency monitoring Iran's nuclear program released a confidential report saying for months the regime hindered access by damaging surveillance cameras while also expanding its nuclear program dangerously close to a weapons-grade level. To avert a political showdown, Iran invited the agency back this weekend, but it could be too late. Meanwhile, Sunday, Israel's defense minister issued another warning with the release of images of an Iranian training base.
The Kashan base, located north of the city of Isfahan, is used to train terrorists from Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Iran has developed proxy terror, which is perpetrated by organized terror armies, which are assisting Iran in achieving its economic, political, and military goals.
The camps include another weapon of terror, military drones.
One of the most significant tools employed by Iran and its proxies is UAVs, with a range of thousands of kilometers. Hundreds of these UAVs are spread across Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Iran is also attempting to transfer the know-how needed for UAV production to Gaza.
Seth Frantzman, author of Drone Wars, says this is Iran's war of the future today.
What it tells us is Iran's not just exporting the drones and the blueprints. It's bringing people into Iran, training them, and then setting them back. And I think that's a big implication for the region because it means you have very skilled operators who can use drones to target ships or energy facilities or whatever they want.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Meanwhile, war-torn Afghanistan is in turmoil, yet one ministry predicts it could become the heart of revival in the Middle East. As Caitlin Burke reports, even with the Taliban's efforts to persecute the church, Afghan Christians continue to worship and spread the gospel.
As the new Taliban government tightens its grip on Afghanistan, people can plainly see the darkness of Islam spreading, and they're running toward the light.
As Job says, in the book of Job, he says, when a man is in a heap, on the ground, he stretches out his hand to God. And so it's in the midst of the desperation that souls are hungry. And so it's a moment of opportunity.
Joel Richardson with Global Catalytic Ministries says history proves that oppressive Islamic governance leads to revival in the church.
Iran has the fastest growing church in the world. 7 years after the ISIS blitzkrieg, there's a revival in northern Syria. The establishment of Islamic government provides ripe soil for the church to grow.
The church in Afghanistan is determined to do the same.
They're still actively meeting, studying the scriptures together, worshiping, and sharing the gospel. We actually have a report of one of our leaders who has been sharing the gospel with Taliban members that came into their village, and they've actually been engaging in Bible studies and prayer.
While it's often the sensational reports that make headlines, like a recent one that falsely claimed the underground church there had been martyred, or others that spotlight heroic action, Richardson says Afghanistan's Christians are just real people choosing to live out their Christian faith.
They say they're scared. Many of them are in despair, but it's in that weakness that they're still pushing forward, and they're finding sweetness in all of it.
One Afghan Christian recently reporting back to Global Catalytic Ministries, quote, "There is pain and joy right now. God hasn't left. There is no need to fear what the Taliban is doing. Yes, bad things may happen to us, but God will do something and glorify his name. Richardson worries this could be the calm before the storm, but he says Christians there have submitted themselves to the will of God, come what may.
They've given their future, their fate over to the Lord, knowing that it could result in martyrdom. They understand that very, very clearly, but yet they're pushing forward regardless.
The biggest prayer request right now is for divine protection. One Christian writing that they continue to remember the passage where Jesus' enemies are after him and he passes through a crowd and disappears. Divine camouflage. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Thanks, Caitlin. Gordon, a powerful testimony of standing on their faith.
It is a powerful testimony, and it's just the power of the word. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Lord always raises up a standard. I just wish this hadn't happened. If we had just said, okay, we're in here for the long haul, 20 years is just beginning if you're trying to remake an entire culture. This Christian persecution goes back a long way, and look back to the 1970s. Then Afghanistan was a kingdom. There was a king. And he made a great show of closing the last church in Kabul. That was back in 1979. And what happened right after that? Well, the Russians invaded. And so a whole new war over the next 9 years resulted. The culture didn't change. What's going to change that culture? Well, it's going to be the constant application of prayer, Christians being willing to die for their faith, and realize it may take generations to have this change. The church is used to this. This is not new to us. How long did it take the Roman Empire to issue an edict of toleration to allow Christianity? Well, it was roughly 260 years. That was how long it took. There were waves of persecutions through it. We can take a great lesson from the Coptic church in Egypt, where the head of that church says we're used to martyrdom. But the question for all of us and all Christians, are we willing to stand with our brothers and sisters? Are we willing to pray for them? And if the same kind of persecution comes to us, what will we do? And will we be willing to give our lives?